We welcome now Brad White, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Mr. Director, good to see you, sir.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So you guys have been busy since you've been in this role at MDOT. Numerous projects underway right now across the state of Mississippi, and several that you have completed. I've had the privilege of seeing you address our group in Madison County. You always come and give us an update on what's going on at MDOT. So where are we? What are you working on right now?
Well, the last time the Federal Highway Administration was reauthorized by Congress, Senator Wicker was able to get an addition. He was the lead Republican on the Transportation Committee at the time that bill was being crafted. And Mississippi received an extra $1 billion over that 5-year period of time that we're currently in. And so with that money, the commission was able to restart the dormant capacity construction program, which are these big projects that you see around that previously we were only able to do if we were awarded a federal grant or something like that. And so starting that back and then the legislature stepping in with one-time money, we've been able to see a lot of orange barrels across the state. Yeah. And we're real excited about that. We've got, I think there's 7 projects that we have underway now, the Greenville Bypass, the I-10 widening in Harrison and Hancock counties from Diamond Head to Wolf River, 4-laning of Highway 19 in Philadelphia, the widening of Highway 57 from I-10 to Van Cleve, Highway 15 in Union County from Pontotoc County, line up to New Albany, US 49 in Harrison County, and then next month we'll break ground on Highway 15 in Tippah County. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of construction that's going to enhance our system and make it more efficient. We're hopefully next week we'll let the contract on the West Rankin Parkway in Rankin County, Highway 477, and have that underway this summer. And then we've got 5 other in the wings that we've identified funding for, from an I-20 Flowers Interchange, US 90 down in Jackson County, another finishing part of Highway 19 in Neshoba County, Highway 7 Lafayette County, and a section of I-55 in DeSoto County. So there's going to be a lot of orange barrels around, as you can see, thanks to the funding that we've gotten from the federal government and, of course, from the legislature. We've got 8 other major projects that our program is funding now to bring through the process of pre-construction, doing the environmental, the survey, the design, the moving of utilities, and all of those things. No funding has been identified as to how to build them once we get them to shovel readiness, if you will. And so that's what brings us to the big conversation that we're trying to have with the legislature about taking a step to modernize the way that we fund our transportation system, because, as you know, we spend our state money first in order to receive the federal dollars back from the Federal Highway Administration, so we run a reimbursement program. And the only way that this program works is with a steady stream of recurring revenue that can be depended upon to build out these projects and to keep them moving through the life of the projects. And currently, that's a outdated formula, if you will, that we have. So hopefully we're going to have a conversation starting this summer with the legislative leadership to look at modernizing that system.
So explain for the benefit of our audience, and I know I ask you to do this every time you come on, but I think it's important that the public is educated about this. Your streams of revenue, and what that amounts to.
Yeah, primarily it's a fuel tax. We're the largest special fund agency in the state. We do get money, as you know, from lottery. We get money from fees on electric and hybrid vehicles and a few other little taxes. But the bulk of the money comes from the state and federal fuel tax. Our annual budget's around $1.5 billion a year. With that, we have to maintain an asset of about $66 billion worth of highways and bridges. That's about 33,000 miles of highway, over 500 bridges, as well as try to be proactive in building out projects like the ones I just mentioned that would enhance the system to allow it to stay ahead of the game where traffic is growing and populations are growing, and hopefully enhancing economic development. The way that we have to do that is we take the state resources that we have and spend that first. And when the Federal Highway Administration is able to ascertain that we're spending things and building things in accordance with their regulation and standards, then they reimburse us with the federal money that's been allocated for Mississippi. So that federal dollars that we get, it doesn't sit in an account down here waiting to be spent. It's a reimbursement of sorts. So we have an account that we keep about $150 million in, and that money is kind of like the water in a river. It's not the same as the day before as it would be the next day. But what we're finding is, even with the lottery and the electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles and the one-time money, our funding model is basically the same as it's been since 1987. That was the last time it was adjusted in any way. A lot of people in the past have talked about trying to raise the fuel tax, as you and I have talked before. I'm not sure that's the way to go. I don't think that you could raise the fuel tax enough to provide the resources necessary. I don't think the people could handle that. I think the smart way to go about it is to have a more diversified approach within the existing budget, whether that's giving us a portion of the unobligated use tax, a portion of the unobligated gaming revenue, and other streams of revenue that the state collects, that those portions that are already obligated are already being spent on transportation-related functions around the state at the local level. And so this would allow us to have a more reliable stream of revenue to continue carrying out this program without extra burden on the taxpayers.
So the federal money that the state receives, Brad, are there restrictions on that? And here's what I mean by that. Can that money be spent on any infrastructure assets that are not federal? I mean, can you spend that on state highways, for example?
Yeah, we use federal money in everything that we do.
Okay.
The state highways, the interstates, our bridges, and all of that. Now, when the money comes down, it comes in buckets. So the commissioners don't have the discretion that, say, the Board of Supervisors has with the revenue that they have to spend it
for county roads, for example.
We have to use it in from safety projects to capacity projects to various paving projects. We run 4 different paving programs that are in 4 different buckets that we operate. So we kind of play a shell game with our state funds to make sure we're maximizing the use of the federal dollars that's made available to us. And the problem is when you do that, sooner or later you're going to run out of state dollars and start leaving federal money on the table. Yeah. And so that's why we're getting to a point to where some of these projects, these 8 projects that we have in the queue that we're bringing to shovel readiness, if we don't have a change in the way that we're funded, I'm not so sure those projects won't end up on a shelf somewhere waiting to figure out how do we build them once we bring them to that point in their life.
So are there some requirements from in using federal money for these projects that the state must prove that it's got ongoing financial ability to maintain?
We have to build things to their standards, obviously. So we're not just building a bridge. That we have to be able to show that the bridge is able to hold up the traffic and meets all the federal standards, safety regulations, design standards, and et cetera.
Sure.
We have to meet certain environmental standards as we're in the pre-construction process. I do think that it doesn't make sense for them to continue approving us using our federal money on pre-construction activities if there's no path to build the project once it's brought to construction readiness.
I got you.
And so that's where it brings us back to the point of discussing this funding model. And, we were talking the other day with some of the legislative leadership, and I know that we have a lot of competing interest when we take this core function of government across the street to the Capitol. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your health insurance is if your ambulance gets stuck in the traffic on the way to the hospital. And it doesn't matter how much money we put in public education if the school buses cease to be able to cross the bridges. And this is a function of government that I think the taxpayers expect government to provide them and use their money wisely, and we try to do that. But unfortunately, we're using 1987 revenue with 2024 cost.
Yeah, it's also critical, as you know, in landing business investment and courting prospective companies to build here.
Every conversation that I've had with the Mississippi Development Authority, with all the projects that they've been bringing in as of late, those conversations involve what improvements must be made immediately and in a certain time frame in order to land the company. And they have to make sure that they can get their people and their goods in and out of that facility in a way that allows them to conduct business and meet their deadlines. Yeah. So it is key to everything we do.
And in fact, often it's the difference between winning and losing that project to another state that can accommodate that.
And that's all the more reason we should be in a position to be proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah. If you can hang around, we talk
Sure.
some more after the break. We got Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation, Brad White, in the Element Wealth studio. We're coming right back. Barry in Golden sent us a text, said, I just want to insert this, just started listening on Fox during lunch. A Democrat congressman has officially called for Biden to step down. Yeah, I got that notification as well, Barry, and it's Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan, the congressman from Ohio, actually former congressman. Now, there may be an active congressman that has done the same, but Tim Ryan is a former congressman.
Yeah, Lloyd Doggett.
Okay. So
from Texas.
You may see more and more of this coming out. We're in the Element Wealth studio visiting with Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation, Brad White. So one question here that I had on the C-Spire text line from Brian in Clarksdale. Brad, what % dollars are from gaming funds? I can go ahead and answer that. I think a lot of people are a little surprised to learn that the gaming tax, which is levied on the casino industry in the state of Mississippi, is just essentially deposited into the general fund. Some of it is transferred in accordance with law to the local areas where the casinos are built. It's about $260 million a year. About $80 million or so of that goes locally. The rest of it just goes to the general fund. So it's not earmarked for anything. However, the lottery's different. The first $80 million of net proceeds generated on an annual basis are transferred to the treasurer and then deposited into the state highway fund, which is just part of your total source of revenue.
80 of about 1.45 billion.
Yeah.
And the commissioners made the decision to dedicate 100% of that 80 to the preservation of the two-lane highways around the state. And I think that number is over 3,000 lane miles of two-lane highways that the lottery has been able to rehabilitate.
Okay. So it's 5% of the total budget.
Right. The problem we're seeing, though, is when we began getting the 80 million, asphalt didn't nearly cost as much as it does now. Labor didn't cost as much as now. Equipment cost. And so the same amount of money is going into this paving program, but you're seeing less paving projects come out of it because the money just doesn't go as far.
Yeah.
And with the gaming revenue, also, back when that was first levied, it was used to pay off some highway sinking funds when they built out the system around the casinos and stuff.
Yeah.
But there is a large portion of that that's unobligated that goes in the general fund, and that was one of our arguments, that would be a stream of revenue that could be dedicated to either our capacity program or to the paving program without having to raise taxes.
Yeah. And that the legislature could do that. I mean, they could pass legislation in the next session, essentially, that would just define that a certain amount or percentage of the total funds generated from the gaming tax would essentially be transferred to the state highway department.
And there was a bill for that. I mean, one of the things that we did early on, we knew that one of the problems MDOT had with the legislature was the legislature having confidence that when they gave the agency money, it was going where they intended for it to go.
Sure.
So we set up accounts at the Department of Finance and Administration that, as you know, is under the purview of the governor. And we have a capacity construction account, a paving account, a federal match account. And so now there's a mechanism in place that if the legislature chooses, they could send a dedicated stream of revenue to any or all of those accounts, and by force of law, regardless of who's on the commission, regardless of who's the director, by force of law, know that money is going directly to a project. It's not being used on an office or a salary or a vehicle. It's going to projects that are outlined in our 3-year plan.
Okay.
And this last session, Senator Jennifer Branning, in fact, who's chairman of Transportation, introduced a bill that would have sent 15% of the unobligated use tax, which was around $150 million a year, I think, to one of those funds. I can't remember if it was a capacity or paving, and then the unobligated portion of the gaming revenue to the other one.
Okay.
And so that would have been a way to help cash flow those projects without having to raise taxes, which we liked. Of course, my job is not to make policies to spend the money, but at the end of the day, that's the conversation that has to be had is how do we want to pay for the system that the taxpayers are expecting?
what's the general reaction from members of the legislature when you have this discussion with them?
Well, it's generally very positive. I don't know of anyone under the Capitol dome that's anti-transportation. I think it all boils down to where do we get the money? Because, like I mentioned earlier, they have a lot of competing interests that they've got to pay for. This last session alone, you had education, you had the healthcare debate, you had the PERS issue that was in front of them. Mm-hmm. But like I said, this is one of those things that I hope we don't allow it to get to a point to where it's an emergency before we start addressing it. The commission about 12 or 15 years ago was in this position, and that was when they were forced to stop the capacity program or put a moratorium on those major construction projects in order to divert all the money to maintenance, to the preservation of the existing investment the taxpayers have. And that's why you've got traffic problems around the state now, because the program that was designed to keep our system efficient and looking ahead of the traffic was dormant for over a decade. And so that's why we have issues on I-20 or on the coast or I-55 in DeSoto, and et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully we can have a meaningful conversation that'll avoid that. And I'm happy to report that I expect that, both from the Speaker's tax committee that he's appointed. I think this is going to be a major part of their discussions. And the Lieutenant Governor has had conversations with me as late as this past week about tell us what your deficit is and give me your ideas of where we could get the money. Okay. So I think there's a real interest there. I just think we've just got to have a champion willing to say, okay, this is important enough, we've got to make it happen now.
Well, the state has enjoyed pretty nice surpluses the last few years, and that's even with reducing the income tax. We've seen income tax revenues fall somewhat, but we've seen sales tax revenues increase.
Right.
So with a net total increase.
It's all a matter of priorities.
Yeah, I totally agree. So you and I were chatting a little bit offline. I think we've talked transportation. I always appreciate your insight and your ability to articulate what the agency does and what its needs are. We appreciate that. But you have some experience similar to what we're witnessing right now with the president, who is clearly in mental decline. You were chief of staff of Mississippi Senator Thad Cochran. Tell us the story there.
Well, Senator Cochran, was elected to, I think, a 7th term. He was older, and as with anybody of advanced age, a little bit slower. But he was always very much aware of his situation. And I want to make one thing clear. Thad ran our office. I took my directives from him. And the time I spent as his chief of staff, I learned more about how a public servant is supposed to act and serve the people than I could have in all the other years combined. But I remember having conversations with Senator Cochran where he would say, that it was on his mind that if he thought he got to where he couldn't function, that he would make the decision to retire. And one day he had a health issue to where he had lost a lot of blood and had to receive a transfusion of that. And after that, the shock to his system, he was never really able to recuperate from that. And when that happened, it was Thad Cochran who said, it's time for me to retire. And we had the conversation and put everything in motion for him to come home. And so I viewed, our role, my first priority as a staff member, and I can say that 100% of Senator Cochran's staff shared this feeling. It wasn't just me. Our first obligation was to take care of him and to make sure that his dignity was protected as much as possible, and to make sure that his wishes were being carried out the way that he would want them to be. And then second to that was an obligation back to the state and to the country. But you didn't have to worry about those obligations because Senator Cochran was taking care of that. Yeah. You don't see a lot of that in this discussion. I felt really sorry for the president, to be honest with you, whenever I was watching the debate, to know that he was put in that position to be exposed like that.
So just to be clear, to recap, the senator approached you and said, I think it's time.
Yes, yeah. But I was having lunch in Washington, and his wife called and said that he wanted to see me at the house, and I went over to his house, and he and I and Miss Cochran and another friend of the family was in the room, and that's when he told me, he said, I think it's time. And so we're in the middle of the negotiations over this big omnibus bill that would fund all of government. So we realized this isn't going to be like, let's just cut the lights out and go home. But steps were taken at that time to start the process of picking the date that he would leave and try to exit, leaving nothing undone, but at the same time handling things the way he always did, in an honorable way.
Man, that's fascinating, and honestly, I've never heard that story before, Brad. I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about it and you share it, but you've got to have respect for the senator. It's got to be tough to be in the center of power like that. I mean, he was a very senior senator at that point.
He never cared about the power. He cared about the people. Had he done what he wanted to do, he would probably retired in 2014. He just answered a call to public service is all.
But something that's been your whole life, that you've dedicated your life to, and you come to the conclusion that it's time for me to step down, that had to be very difficult.
Yeah. Well, he left it all on the field for sure.
No doubt. Appreciate it, Brad. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Wealth Studio.